The Willow Grove Cafe was a coveted spot for the city's elite, nestled between rows of manicured trees, with the soothing hum of a nearby fountain adding to its charm. It was midday, and the cafe buzzed with activity. Waiters, dressed in neat uniforms, weaved gracefully between tables, carrying trays laden with gourmet dishes and freshly brewed coffee. The air carried the warm scent of freshly baked bread mixed with the faint sweetness of blooming flowers. Yet, for one man, none of it seemed remarkable. At the center of the cafe sat Lucas Sterling, a name synonymous with wealth and power. He had built his fortune from the ground up, starting with real estate in his 20s and expanding into businesses that few could ever dream of. At 72, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who not only owned his world, but perhaps everyone else's around him. His sharp suit and gold-rimmed glasses were a reflection of a life of luxury. But as he glanced at the menu, his movements seemed slow, almost hesitant. Sitting across from him was his much younger wife, Isabel. She was the epitome of elegance, with flawless jet-black hair framing a face that could have been on the cover of a fashion magazine. Every inch of her screamed sophistication, but her smile was hollow. She absent-mindedly twirled a diamond bracelet on her wrist, her eyes glued to her phone screen, disconnected from the man sitting right in front of her. Nearby, a young boy lingered just outside the cafe's patio fence. He was small for his age, his oversized hoodie hanging loosely on his thin frame. His dark eyes moved rapidly from table to table, scanning the plates and pockets, searching for an opportunity. His name was Noah, though no one inside the cafe knew him. He was a familiar face on this street, a homeless kid always at the edges of conversations, never quite belonging. Lucas glanced up from his menu and addressed Isabel, his voice calm but pointed. "You're distracted again." Isabel looked up with a forced smile, her tone sweet but lacking warmth. "I'm right here." She reached across the table to place her hand on his. "You know how much I enjoy these lunches." Noah's stomach growled loudly, pulling his attention back to the cafe. He moved closer, his footsteps almost silent, and leaned against the patio railing. His eyes landed on Lucas and Isabel's table. The meal in front of them was the kind of food he hadn't seen up close in months, a pristine bowl of soup, accompanied by fresh bread and a glass of sparkling water. Then, something unusual happened. As Lucas adjusted his glasses and began to check his phone, Isabel's hand slid into her designer handbag. Noah's sharp eyes caught the movement. He watched as she pulled out a small vial, twisted it open with a casual flick, and poured the contents into the steaming bowl of soup. The liquid disappeared into the broth almost instantly, like it had never been there. Noah's breath caught in his throat. He froze, staring at Isabel as she stirred the soup with a spoon, her expression unchanged. Then, leaning closer to Lucas, her voice dropped low but was just audible enough for Noah to hear. "After everything I've done, you won't ruin this now?" The boy blinked, unsure if what he had seen was real. Could a woman who appeared so perfect, sitting in such a pristine place, really be doing what he thought she was doing? Noah couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. His heart pounded in his chest as he crouched lower behind the railing. He wasn't sure what he had just witnessed, but the chilling words Isabel had whispered kept echoing in his mind. He clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms. No one else had noticed. No one was paying attention to him, the boy in the ragged hoodie. Yet, his eyes remained glued to Lucas, who seemed entirely unaware of what was happening in front of him. Noah felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. His instincts told him to walk away. Why get involved? Who would believe a homeless kid like him? He swallowed hard and glanced around at the other patrons, all of whom were too absorbed in their own conversations to notice the quiet tension brewing just outside their focus. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something needed to be done. His gaze returned to Lucas, who was about to dip his spoon into the soup. Noah's chest tightened. He had seen Isabel pour something into it, and he knew what would happen if Lucas took a bite. Without thinking, Noah pushed himself off the railing and walked straight toward the table. His legs felt like lead, but his feet didn't stop moving. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Don't eat that." Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The clatter of a dropped fork rang out through the cafe. All eyes turned toward the boy. Lucas froze, his spoon inches from his lips. His wide eyes locked on Noah. Isabel snapped her head around, her expression hardening. "What did you just say?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Noah didn't flinch. His voice shook, but he stood his ground. "She put something in your food. I saw her," he shouted. "Don't eat it." Gasps rippled through the cafe, and every patron turned their attention to the scene unfolding before them. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. Lucas glanced between Noah and Isabel, his confusion growing. "What is he talking about?" he asked, his voice calm but trembling slightly. Isabel's composure snapped. She stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped against the floor. "You little liar," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "How dare you accuse me of such a thing?" Noah didn't back down. His eyes remained locked on Lucas. "I saw her. She poured something into your soup when you weren't looking. You can smell it if you don't believe me." Lucas's face paled. He turned to Isabel, his expression now serious. "What's going on here?" "Isabel?" Isabel scoffed and waved him off. "He's just trying to cause trouble. Look at him. He probably just wants money or food." She spit out the words, her eyes narrowing with open disdain. But Noah wasn't afraid. He stepped closer to the table, his fists clenched. "I'm not lying," he said, his voice firm. "She doesn't want you to know, but I saw everything." Lucas's hand hovered over the bowl. He hesitated, unsure whether to believe what the boy was saying. But something about the urgency in Noah's tone made him pause. The cafe's lively atmosphere had turned to eerie quiet, all eyes now on the trio. Lucas leaned back in his chair, his gaze intense as he studied the boy. "Malik," Lucas said, using the boy's name. "You said you saw her put something in the soup. Can you describe it?" His voice was steady, though a trace of suspicion lingered. Noah nodded, stepping forward. "It was a small bottle, like one you'd use for medicine. Clear liquid. She poured it in while you were looking at your phone. Then she stirred it. I swear I saw it." Lucas's face tightened. He turned to Isabel, but she shook her head furiously. "This is absurd," she spat. "Why would I?" But Lucas interrupted her. Why would he lie? What could he possibly gain from this? His words seemed to cut through her protests. The crowd began to murmur, and the sound of sirens in the distance heightened the tension in the air. Isabel's eyes darted toward the soup. For just a moment, her perfectly crafted mask slipped, and Lucas saw fear in her eyes. Then, suddenly, she rounded on Noah. "You've been spying on us, haven't you?" she accused, her voice venomous. "Trying to cause trouble because you're jealous of people who have something. Is that it?" The words hit Noah like a slap, but he stood his ground. "I'm not jealous," he said firmly. "I saw what I saw. I couldn't just stand there and say nothing." Just then, two police officers entered the cafe, their eyes scanning the room. One of them asked, "What's going on here?" Lucas stood, his commanding presence filling the room. "Officers, I need you to take a look at this," he said, gesturing toward the bowl of soup. "This boy claims my wife poisoned it." The officers exchanged looks before one leaned over, sniffing the bowl. "Ma'am, do you have anything to say about this?" he asked Isabel. She went crimson. "This is ridiculous. He's just a street kid trying to make trouble." The officer was unmoved. "We need to test the contents," he said, reaching for the bowl. "No," Isabel snapped. Her sudden panic only made her look more guilty. The officer paused, narrowing his eyes. "Ma'am, is there something you'd like to tell us before we proceed?" Isabel hesitated, her chest rising and falling. She glanced at Lucas, then at the officers. Her hands trembled as she clutched her hand back. Finally, she broke. "Fine," she said, her voice low but venomous. "You want the truth? I'm tired of living in his shadow. I'm tired of his control over everything. He was never supposed to make it past this year. And I—" She stopped abruptly, realizing too late that she'd said too much. Gasps rippled through the cafe. Patrons pulled out their phones, recording the shocking scene. Lucas's face went pale as the truth crashed down on him. The officer stepped forward, his voice grim. "Ma'am, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder. Please put your hands where I can see them." Isabel screamed, trying to break free, but the officers secured her wrists. You don't understand. I deserved everything. He had everything, she shouted as they led her away. Lucas sank back into his chair, his hand trembling as he pushed the soup away. For a long moment, he said nothing. His face was a mask of disbelief and betrayal. His eyes found Noah, who was standing frozen, unsure of what to do next. Lucas's expression softened. A flicker of gratitude replaced the anger. You saved my life, he said quietly. The cafe began to murmur once again. The tension had lifted, but the weight of what had transpired lingered in the air. Malik, Lucas said, gesturing to the seat across from him. Sit. Noah hesitated, looking around at the onlookers. But Lucas's voice carried a weight that made him obey. Slowly, he sank into the chair. You saved my life, Lucas repeated, his voice low but firm. I don't know how I can ever repay you. Noah's hands fidgeted as he gripped the edge of the table. I couldn't let it happen, he murmured. Lucas nodded. Most people would have walked away, but you didn't. That took courage. Noah shrugged. I guess I just don't like seeing people get hurt. Lucas studied the boy, truly seeing him for the first time. How long have you been out here? He asked. Noah looked away, embarrassed. A while. Lucas frowned but didn't press. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black phone. Wait here, he said, stepping aside to make a call. Noah watched him nervously. Was he in trouble? Was Lucas calling someone to remove him? But when Lucas returned, his expression was calm, even kind. Help is on the way, he said simply. Help? Noah asked, his brow furrowing. Lucas nodded. I called someone I trust. They'll make sure you have a place to sleep tonight. Somewhere safe. Noah's eyes widened. You don't have to do that. Lucas smiled faintly. I know. That's why I want to help you. You did something most people wouldn't have. And trust me, Noah, if the world had more people like you, it would be a much better place. For the first time in a long while, Noah felt something he couldn't describe, a warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He glanced up at Lucas, unsure of what to say. The cafe patrons slowly began to disperse, but the weight of what had happened lingered in the air. Sometimes, Lucas said, taking a sip of water, life gives us the chance to change someone else's story. He looked at Noah. You changed mine today, and maybe, just maybe, I can help change yours. Noah looked up at him. His dark eyes glistened with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, hope. As they sat in silence, the sun continued its arc across the sky, casting long shadows across the cafe. The lesson wasn't lost on anyone who had witnessed the event. Courage doesn't always wear a suit, and kindness doesn't always come from the wealthy. Sometimes, it's the people we overlook who have the greatest strength of all. In the end, Noah's bravery didn't just save a life. It reminded everyone in that cafe of the power of standing up for what's right, no matter the odds. If this story touched you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us for more tales of courage, truth, and redemption. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that even small actions can create life-changing impacts.